Hello everyone, I'm back in my Hydra Base toy box along with Nick Fury, and today I'm going to implement the logic for the moving hazards in my ledge hang maze over there. My idea for this obstacle came from the footage of the cancelled Moana playset that Infinitier Adventures shared on their channel some months ago. I'll include a link to it in my video description for those of you who haven't seen it. The footage featured gameplay for the Impossible Cliff, an area which contained a series of ledge hang mazes with some creatures moving along the ledges that players must avoid. As soon as I saw this footage, I knew I wanted to try to implement something like it in the 3.0 toy box if I could. If you saw my playthrough video for this toy box back in episode 1, then you know I succeeded. So today I'm going to show you how to implement this obstacle for yourselves. And this is something you can add to any kind of toy box, no matter what theme or setting you're using. So even if you're not planning to build this particular toy box, you can still use this feature in any of your own toy box creations. Now to save a little time, I've already placed the Creativitoys that I'm going to need, or most of them. So let's look at those first. We have two locators, because I'm going to have two hazards moving across the ledge hang mazes, and I need a locator for each hazard. For each hazard, I also have two distance checkers. And you might be wondering why I'm using a distance checker versus a dynamic trigger, and I'll explain that when we get a little bit further into the video here. We also have an effects generator, a kill switch, and a level starter. And I've also got a button here that we can use to invoke the level starter, so we don't have to exit out of the toy box and reload it. And before I forget, let's go ahead and connect that up right now. So then we just have to push that button later. Okay, the other thing we're going to need are the paths along the ledges, which those hazards are going to move along. So the first one is going to sit right here on this ledge, on this end of it. So I'll drop my path, and the other point goes at the other end, and then I'll exit out. And the second path is going to go up on this ledge, so we'll drop that. And then for the points, I'm going to put one on each of these seams because we're doing a little diagonal thing here, so it's not straight. And I want to make sure the point moves along that ledge as closely as possible. So that's why we're doing that. So there's our two paths, one for each of the points, one for each of the hazards. For the properties on each of these paths, let's go ahead and set those next. So on the properties for this one, we're going to leave active set to on. We're going to change the speed to 50. That seems to be a good speed. 40 would work. Anything shorter than 40 would probably be a little too slow. And we're going to turn off the auto start objects when connected, because that will make this a lot easier to hook up. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other path. So speed set to 50, auto start objects off. All right. Next thing, let's go ahead and hook up our locators to those paths. Actually, before we do that, it's probably going to be easier to connect things to the locators. So the effects generator is what's going to give us the visual effect for the hazard. So we'll hook this up to the locators, and you can use the same effects generator for all of the locators here. We're going to have 5 hazards total. 2 of them on this ledge hang maze, and 3 on the other ones. So you can use the same effects generator for multiple locators. That saves you a little bit of memory. And we're also going to hook up the distance checkers to this. And I guess maybe this would be a good time as any to explain why I'm not using a dynamic trigger. Because normally you would think I would use a dynamic trigger, and normally I would. But there's a couple of things about the dynamic trigger that make it a problem for what we're doing here. The first is that a dynamic trigger creates a radius around the point, and the radius is pretty much a lateral radius, which means it's positioned horizontally around the point, which works fine if you're out approaching the point from a distance that's at the same level as the point, or a little bit above or a little bit below. If you're in a situation, though, where you're directly above the point or directly below it, it doesn't work quite as reliably. And that's the case that we're going to have up here, because you're going to be on the ledge hangs above and below these points. The other problem with the dynamic trigger is that it only makes its check once every second or so, which means because of the tight radius that we're going to put around each of these points, you can actually move along the ledge right across the point, and the dynamic trigger will never fire. It'll never trigger that and never activate any toys you connect to it, because it's possible to move across that short distance along the ledge hang where this point is, in between the distance checks that dynamic trigger makes, because it only does it again once every second or so. And so for those reasons, we can't really use the dynamic trigger because it's not reliable. And so because of that, we're using a distance checker instead. And I have not done a tutorial on the distance checker yet in my Toy Box tutorial series, so I apologize for that. So I'm going to have to give you a little bit of a tutorial on this for those of you who aren't familiar with this toy or haven't used it. Basically, if we open up the properties for this, you can set two targets, target A and target B, and you can set each of these to a wide variety of things. The players, a team, an actor, or a locator. And you can set up to 3 distances for it, and the distances will take into account X, Y, and Z. So it won't matter if you're above or below the point, or out a ways from it, or up above or below it, kind of diagonally. It handles those checks all perfectly. And it makes these checks once every frame. So it's pretty accurate. So as soon as you come within this distance, it immediately fires, which is exactly what we need it to do. There's 3 distances here, which means you can have it do one thing when it comes within distance 1. You can have it do something else when it comes within distance 2, and so on. And we're only going to use one of these distances for our case. And so what we're going to do is we're going to hook this up. And we have 2 of these for each point. And I'll show you why that is. Let's go ahead and hook these up first. So if we hook this up to the locator, this will be target B. And then we come over to our properties. So target B is going to be the locator that we just connected. And target A is going to be the players. I can set this to any player, which is wonderful. And I'll set the distance and the rest of these things here shortly. So then we come up to our logic connection, and when the targets, the players and the point, the locator there, come within the distance that we set, we can trigger off of that. We connect to our kill switch over here. Defeat player, and we have a problem. Because you can only defeat all players or a specific player. There's no option here to just kill the triggering player. And what that means is you would have to kill all players. And that's not going to work, because when player 1 goes across that thing and dies, we only want it to affect player 1. And so this is why we have 2 distance checkers for each point. We need a distance checker for player 1, and we need a distance checker for player 2. And we need 2 for this point. And we need 2 for each of the other points, because we have a total of 5 hazards. So we're going to have 10 distance checkers, all making their computations once every frame. And so this, once we get enemies in here, we get the patrol vehicle moving around, this is going to add to the lag for this toy box. And so there's ways to work around that, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. But let's go ahead and finish setting this one up. So because we can't use any player, target A on this one is going to be player 1. Okay? And then for the distance, This uses the same distance unit as the dynamic trigger. And for those of you who aren't familiar, let me just give you a quick crash course on that because this is really important. So if you have a terrain cube or you have a basic block out of the block drawer, they're basically the same size. When I measure distances in my toy box and I say something is a certain number of blocks away, this is what I'm talking about. Either the terrain cube or that small block from the blocks drawer. The dynamic trigger and the distance checker, the units on that are set up so that there's 4 per block. So measuring from the left edge of this block, this would be 0. A distance of 1 on the distance checker would be about a quarter of the block, so right about where you see my spark. And the halfway point, that would be distance 2. This would be distance 3. And then the right edge of this block would be distance of 4 from the left edge. So these are the units that we're working with. And if I pick this up and bring this over to the ledges here, and you look at the height of the ledges on this, the ledges are about a half a block apart. So they're 2 units apart. Okay? So let me go ahead and place that just to get out of this and delete that because we're done with that. So when we come over here and we set the distance, I can't set this to 0 because the game will not allow me to. It's out of range. The smallest thing you can set this to is 1, which is a quarter of a block. The problem with this is if we come out of here and we look at our logic connection, this says when the targets come within that distance. Well, what's smaller than 1? 0, right? So when the targets come within distance, if you have that set to 1, it's really not going to do anything. And I've tested this out, and what happens is just like the dynamic trigger, you can go right over top of that point as it's moving back and forth along the ledge, and nothing's going to happen. So because of that, the minimum we can set this to and have it to work is 2. And what that distance means is that's the distance between the point as it's moving back and forth along that ledge and the distance of the ledge as you're hanging down here. And so if you're below that ledge, you're pretty much fine because you're right at 2 units away. You're not within 2 units. So you can sit down here on this ledge below and you're okay. Nothing is going to happen to you. But if you're sitting on the ledge above it, your feet are actually just above this ledge, and that's within the 2 units. So this is the one problem that I had implementing this, and I could not find a workaround for, is when you're hanging above the point as it's moving below you on the ledge below you, you can still die even though you're not touching it. That's a little bit of a problem. But I guess if you think about that point as being hot or radioactive or something, then maybe it makes sense that you might die if you get too close. And the fact that you're not touching it is okay. But at any rate, this is how we're going to set up the properties on this. So player 1 is target A, target B is the locator, the distance is going to be 2, and for right now I'm going to leave this on. Alright, so then for this distance checker, this will be for player 2. We got to connect this up to that same point. That's going to be target B. Target A is going to be player 2 this time. Target B, again, is the locator that we just connected. And distance 1 is going to be 2. And I'm not going to use the other 2 distances, so it doesn't matter what we set those to. And then these 2 over here are for the second hazard, the second point. So we're going to connect that up to this locator. That'll be target B once again. This one, oops, not a logic connection. Properties. Target A for this one will be player 1. Target B will be the locator. Distance is going to be 2. And then this one will be for player 2. So the locator again will be for this one. That'll be target B. Under the properties, target A is going to be player 2. Target B is the locator. Distance is going to be 2. Okay, so now we have everything connected up to these locators. Now we can connect the locators to the paths. So this first locator, new path connection, that's going to go to the lower path. And fortunately, it does not move that locator up there automatically like it does for blocks and other toys. That makes this easier to select. So we'll come back to this locator and go to the properties, toy box path. Everything under here is fine except for 2 things. First thing, we want to change the movement style to back and forth. So it's moving back and forth along the ledge. The other thing we need to set is the vertical offset. We need to put this to -1. And the reason we need to do that is because when this starts moving along the path, it's sitting on top of the path. So it's actually going to be moving above this ledge hang. And so we need to set the vertical offset to -1 to get it on the ledge. So that's why we have to do that. The second point, new path connection, that's going to go to the other path. And again, we'll set the properties on that. Toy box path. Vertical offset needs to be -1. Movement style needs to be back and forth. Okay, so at this point, those locators are done. They're hooked up. So now we can come over to our, we can come over to the level starter, do a new logic connection on catalyze. Come over to the path and do a reset and play. And this is going to start the points moving along those paths right when the toy box loads. So right at the beginning, right after we load the toy box. And we want to do the same thing with the other path. Reset and play. And then because we need to be able to see those points, that's why we have the effects generator. So we'll go ahead and hook up our level starter to that. So on the level starter, a new logic connection on catalyze. Come to the effects generator, and we're going to play looped. So this is going to be a continuous effect. We'll go to the explosions category, and we're going to use the subtle fireball. Okay. So now when we push the button, that starts our hazards moving along the ledge hang maze. So there we go. Now the distance checkers are already hooked up to those locators. We just need to hook those up to the kill switch. So on the first one here, we'll do, this is for player 1, so we're going to do a new logic connection. When the targets come within distance 1, we'll come over to our kill switch, and we will defeat player 1. For this distance checker connected to that same point, this is for player 2. So a new logic connection. When the targets come within distance 1, come over to our kill switch, defeat player 2. And the same thing for these. So this is for player 1. Oops, new logic connection. When the targets come within distance 1, come over here and defeat player 1. And this one is for player 2 on that second hazard. So a new logic connection when the targets come within distance 1. Come to the kill switch, defeat player 2. And there we go. At this point, this is working really well, and we can test that out by climbing up here. And if we just sit on the ledge below, you can see it moves back and forth across there and doesn't hurt us. If we come up here, it does. Well, that's really good. And you don't want to get too close to this. And if we just hang up here, this is the problem that I can't work around. That thing still gets you even though you're on the ledge above. But again, if you think of that as being a hot or radioactive thing, then you don't want to be too close to it. So it works. You just got to be careful. Now, the last thing is performance. So we have right now 4 of these things making their distance checks every frame. And we don't have any lag at the moment, but as soon as you start putting 15, 20 enemies in here, you've got the patrol vehicle going around the path and the cannon shooting and all of that stuff, you're going to start to experience lag. And so what you can do, fortunately, is you can turn these things off. And these checks really only need to be made if you're actually on these ledge hangs. And so what we can do is we can add a trigger area up here that we can use to turn these on and off. And that will help out tremendously with the lag. So if we come over here and put this up against the wall, and we put this right over here at this point, and grab this little corner here, and bring this all the way over here. Now we have a trigger area encompassing those ledge hangs. So we can come to the trigger area. We can do a new logic connection when it's entered by player 1. We can come over and turn on player 1's distance checkers. New logic connection when entered by player 1. Come over to this one and turn that one on. And likewise, new logic connection when exited by player 1. We can turn off player 1's distance checkers. And so that way, only the distance checkers that you need will be running at any given time. We can turn that one off. And you can do the exact same thing for the other 2 distance checkers for player 2 entering and exiting this trigger area. And what that will do then is that these will not be running unless the player is in that area. And the other thing you should probably do then is come over to the level starter, do a new logic connection on Catalyze, and turn these off by default when you come into the toy box. And that will minimize the lag. So new logic connection on Catalyze, turn each of these off. And so that way, when you first enter the toy box and you're over on that other corner where the starting pad is, none of the distance checkers will be running. And so they won't be contributing to any lag or anything else. And that'll be really helpful. Okay. And so there we go. There's the ledge hang maze for this one. Now for the others, I'm not going to show you how to hook these up because I've already shown you how to hook it up on the other side and it's no different here. It's the same logic I've just shown you for the first 2. There's no difference at all. You're going to hook them up the same way. They'll each need their own set of creativity toys. So you need your own path, So I've already created a path over here, and this one runs across that ledge, so you can see where that goes. And I've got a trigger area set up here. You can see where that goes. And for each one of these hazards, you need a locator, and you need 2 distance checkers. You can reuse the level starter and the kill switch and the effects generator from the other ones that we set up on the other side. So these are the only new toys you need for this one. But you're going to hook these up the exact same way. And then over here we have 2 hazards that are going to be moving across these ledges that you see here. Let me get out here where you can get a better look at it. There we go. So you can see where those points are for those paths. And again, I've got a locator and 2 distance checkers for each of the hazards up here. Again, one of these is for player 1, one's for player 2, and you're going to hook those up the exact same way as well. So I don't need to show you that for all of these. But that's basically what you need, and at that point you have the hazards like you've seen in the Moana playset, and you can put those in any toy box that you want. Next time I'm going to show you how to hook up the logic for the main mission, which is to bring down the energy shield protecting the main castle. Until then, I want to remind you that if you're building this toy box on your own system, or you want to build this particular feature in your own toy box, you can find a logic diagram on my blog to help you out. You can also subscribe to my channel by clicking my photo in the lower right corner. That's all for me today. Take care.